Day 2 is about Terraform installation and setup. I am not approaching it as a syntax lesson. I am approaching it as a production security infrastructure review. The reason is simple: this is one of those topics that looks fine in a green pipeline until you ask someone to explain how it behaves across environments, who owns the state, and what evidence proves the change is safe. That is where weak infrastructure repos start to wobble. The pressure points today are installing Terraform versus code extensions, provider authentication. Those are not random checklist items. They are the places where drift, secret handling, and rollout mistakes tend to hide. In security infrastructure work, the repo is supposed to make those details easier to inspect, not easier to miss. If a day like this leaves me with hand-wavy answers, I assume the implementation is still fragile. The operational problem underneath the topic is keeping Terraform honest when the state file, provider behavior, and module boundaries are all capable of hiding drift. That means I want more than a successful apply. I want a review path that names the environment, the module or role boundary, the promotion path, and the recovery path. The fastest way to make infrastructure unsafe is to treat the code as complete while the state file, the playbook inventory, or the policy gate still depends on tribal knowledge. When I work through this topic, the artifacts I care about are Terraform plan output, remote state configuration, provider aliases, variables, outputs, and CI checks wired into the repo. Those are the receipts. They tell me whether the repository actually models the infrastructure or whether someone is still fixing the real environment in the console after merge time. If the artifacts are missing, I do not trust the conclusion, because production incidents rarely give you the extra hour you need to reconstruct what happened. Another thing I watch for is boundary confusion. Teams often mix what belongs in Terraform, what belongs in configuration management, and what belongs in the delivery pipeline. That creates a system where every tool technically works but nobody can say where a security control is enforced. I want the repo to make that answer obvious. If the answer changes by environment, that difference should also be obvious. The good version of this day ends with a Terraform workflow where the plan, state backend, and module interfaces explain exactly what the change will touch. Notice that the outcome is not a tool name. It is a behavior. The configuration should be reviewable, the policy should explain its verdict, the pipeline should show its gates, and the rollback or remediation path should already exist before the change ships. If the state file is trusted, it needs ownership, locking, and review discipline. If the module boundary is trusted, it needs readable inputs and outputs. The common failure mode is optimism. Someone writes a neat module, a neat playbook, or a neat policy, but the surrounding workflow still leaks risk. State is shared without locking. Vault values are passed around informally. Drift reports are ignored. GitOps promotions happen with weak ownership. That kind of gap is exactly why infrastructure security work needs boring discipline instead of cleverness. So if you are practicing this yourself, keep asking 4 questions. What is the boundary? What proves the change? Where will drift show up? Who could recover this without the original author? Those questions force the lesson back toward Terraform plan output, remote state configuration, provider aliases, variables, outputs, and CI checks wired into the repo and away from wishful thinking. They also make the series cumulative, because every later project depends on getting these basics right. I also want the review to answer one uncomfortable question: what happens if this change lands on a Friday and the original author is offline when the alert fires? If the answer is, we will figure it out from memory, the infrastructure is still underdocumented. If the answer is, the repo, the runbook, and the pipeline logs already tell us what changed, then the team is building the right operational muscle. That is the real value of Terraform installation and setup. It is not that the configuration exists. It is that the repo, the pipeline, and the operational notes all agree about what changed and why. Once that alignment exists, security infrastructure stops feeling fragile. It becomes easier to reason about, easier to promote, and easier to recover when something fails under pressure.